Now, you've probably read the title of this episode and thought, that's not really applicable to me. And you might be right, but the trust and safety team at LinkedIn are getting rather twitchy, so I wouldn't be too sure. It's LinkedIn Formed, episode 319. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the LinkedIn podcast, LinkedIn Formed, with me, your host, Mark, Mr. LinkedIn Williams. And welcome back to a new episode. And this week we're going to be talking all about the rather horrible subject of getting your account banned on LinkedIn. You know, it happened to me many years ago, actually. I don't know whether I've ever told you that before. But it happened to me many years ago, and I'll share my experience of that later. But I tell you now, it's a horrible thing, and more distressing than you might imagine, actually. And last week in the show, I mentioned the situation that had happened to a recruiter in the US where they'd got their account banned, and there was a bit of a campaign to get her account back up live, which was successful, or certainly her account was brought back. And but I mentioned that I wasn't quite sure about the full circumstances. I was slightly confused as to how that could happen to someone with a recruiter account, which is what the information that was out there at the time suggested. So I contacted her and she agreed to come on the show to explain her story. So we'll cover that in this episode. But broadly, I want to talk about the whole issue about the things that could get you banned. Obviously, a slightly contentious title to this episode. I don't want you to get banned, and I'm not encouraging you to do these things that would get you banned. More, quite the opposite, actually. So what I'm really saying is the things that you can do to get banned are the things that you definitely shouldn't do, or be very careful. There's no question in my mind that LinkedIn are up in their game, and in many respects, I quite applaud that, because automation is a nightmare. You know, I ran a session this week for a client on groups, well, communities on LinkedIn. And there are more communities on LinkedIn than just in groups, but on the groups bit of it, I felt I needed to explain the background of groups before selling the idea to them that they should consider starting a group, which I do think is something that people should consider in the right circumstances now with LinkedIn. And by going through the history, it was a reminder to me of what can happen when controls are not in place to stop automation and to stop the kind of behavior that ruined groups. And if we allow things like automation to take hold of LinkedIn, then it will become like groups, i.e. a place that you're still there, but you don't actually ever really turn up, because it's just full of rubbish and full of spam. Now, that's not the case at the moment, but that would be the case if the trust and safety team didn't do their job properly. Of course, doing their job properly has a fine line where they can get overzealous, and there are going to be innocent victims. To me, I guess the litmus test of whether trust and safety are doing a good job is whether there are occasionally innocent victims, because if that happens, then they're probably doing their job pretty well and just occasionally go over the line. Of course, that does cause us potentially problems, because we may be very active LinkedIn users, and most of the people that listen to this show are, and there may be actions that you might be taking that could be putting your account in danger without realizing it. And that's why I thought it would be very relevant to cover that subject in this episode. We also have a couple of news pieces to talk about, something to do with LinkedIn Live, and also something to do with LinkedIn as a company, but not much really in the news this week. And we also, of course, have a Post of the Week. It's been very competitive for Post of the Week this week. I've had, I think, about 7 nominations, all of which were really, good winners in their own right, but I've had to pick one, and I'll reveal what that is later. All right, so that's it for this week, and let's get on with it. Okay, so let's start with some news. And after a very busy week for LinkedIn with regards to new features, as you would expect, really, it's been a fairly light week this week. In fact, not only that, but the second piece of news will perhaps explain why to a certain extent as well. More of that in a minute. But they have brought out one very small new feature, although I do like it. This is only regards people that have the facility to deliver LinkedIn Lives. I suddenly feel very guilty looking at stuff like this because I know a lot of people would really like Live, and I really wanted it to try it out. I was always skeptical about it, but I wanted to try it out, and I applied and I managed to get it. I know a lot of people haven't, and they would probably use it far more than me. I experimented with a couple, so I got a feel for it and haven't really done any since. I probably need to do some, really. Partly because I think it's just a variety of content, isn't it? And mixing it up is a good thing. But also I feel a little bit responsible for the fact that I've been given the privilege of having it and I'm not really using it. Anyway, that's just sharing my guilt to you. But they have changed the dashboard. And it does look a lot better. I mean, it is a while since I've done a live, and I'm not sure I can remember the dashboard especially well. But it does look a lot better. I'll put a screenshot of it in the show notes and the article accompanying this podcast. The show notes can be found at linkedinform.com. I'm changing my website, by the way. Currently working on it. So if you do go to the show notes, it's not going to change yet, but I'll tell you when it does, and I'd appreciate your feedback. Anyway, that's an aside. So I'll put a screenshot of it so anybody that has used Live will see what I mean. So you can schedule a live for later, or you can go live now. You can add hashtags and type in your post really about it, and that goes out to on the feed of people if you're going to be announcing it via a post, which obviously you should do. And then on the right hand side there's very clear instructions on setting up your stream with one of those horrible little cartoon things that they have, which is you still have to use a third party, but it just is a lot easier. And you sort of put your region, you put your stream URL, and you put in your stream key. It just I think from what I remember it last time, they've just tidied it up a lot really. But then it's got stream settings, stream health, and analytics as well. And so obviously that gives you data. Now I've not seen it because I've not tried it, but that gives you some data on how well the stream works in terms of, I guess, bandwidth and all that kind of stuff. But then after you go live, you get some analytics about it as well. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but we didn't have that previously. So it's good to see that they are working on this and improving it. Although I do still find myself questioning why you have to go through a third party. Nothing against the third party providers, but I'm not aware that you don't have to do that, say on Facebook. And it kind of strikes me a bit. It's different to everything else they do. You know, most features like this, they bring out really orientated towards mobile. Not specifically desktop, whereas this one is all desktop really. And, you know, isn't the purpose of Live, I mean, yeah, I'm not into Live particularly, but I've always thought that the kind of idea is that it's almost like something's happening and you want to record it and you go live, you know. So here I am at da-da-da-da, and you do that on your phone and then you just post it. Well, not post it, but you go live specifically at that given moment, just at the drop of a hat. Whereas the way Live seems to work to me anyway is that that's not really happening because people are organising it, thinking ahead about it, arranging to interview someone or something like that, and then running live. And I'm a bit like, well, why not just do it on a video? You know, what's the point? Just, I don't know. I've always struggled a bit with the whole concept of Live, and my perception of what it is, this kind of in the spur of the moment thing, which is much more mobile than desktop, isn't what it is. And I just wonder whether they are going to develop that, and whether they are going to have a situation where you can just literally open up your LinkedIn app and just start recording a live video straight into the app and on you go. Seems to me that's what live should be. But hey, let me know what you think about that. So one of the reasons why we might not have seen as many features this week and so many were crammed into last week is that LinkedIn surprised most of their staff last week by telling them they could have this week off. How nice of them. And it's an interesting one, this, to me. So basically, this was announced on April the 2nd, so it may well be actually that it's not this week and it's next week they're off, because I think it says they're off from next week. I know, starting April the 5th, says here, so actually they are off now. As I'm recording this, they are off work. Well, 15,900 full-time employees are off, and it's a paid week off, right? And the idea is to prevent burnout. Tula Hansen, who is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, I think it's Tula Hansen, LinkedIn's Chief People Officer, otherwise known as an HR director in normal language, told CNN the company decided to give employees the week off after seeing how employees felt energized following the company's December holiday shutdown. We wanted to make sure we could give them something really valuable, and what we think is most valuable right now is time for all of us to collectively walk away. And what is really nice after a shutdown, you come back and you don't have a barrage of emails or meeting notes that you feel like you have to catch up on, or you feel like you have to peek at your email. Okay, now that bit is where it falls down a little bit for me. Now, to be fair, they have got a skeleton staff covering anything urgent, but I don't know about you, but I've never done a job in my life where if I take a week off from it, there isn't a build-up of things to do. I just think that's a bit of BS, frankly. I don't think that's going to be the case. And also, in addition to that, how many of these... I sound so cynical sometimes, don't I? But how many of these LinkedIn employees who are working from home anyway are actually not going to look at their emails or do any work? I'm not quite sure. Is that really going to happen? Just knowing what people are like, I can't imagine that will happen. But it is interesting, this whole subject about burnout, and I've talked about this before. I think LinkedIn have a problem, and I think that they've had this problem for quite a long time. And that problem is that they are heavily understaffed. Now, I've dealt with people at LinkedIn over the years that I've been doing this, a number of different people, and the ones that I've developed good relationships have all been really good people. You know, people that I would make a judgment of and say, these are polite, professional, and committed. And every single one of them have been people that have not got back to me when they said they would, and have been slow in responding to messages, and then genuinely apologise when they do come back to me, because they are decent people. They're not ignorant in any way, shape or form. You can tell. I mean, I spent 20 years working in recruitment, and in recruitment you deal with lots of different organisations, and you also interview lots of people, obviously, that are leaving companies, and you get a real sense and a real feel for organisations and the culture and what it's like to work there through that process. So I think my kind of yardstick of judgment here is quite strong, and my assessment of LinkedIn as a company is that either on purpose or not, they are understaffed. Now, my guess is, it's only a guess, is that it's not on purpose. They've currently, as we speak, got nearly 600 live job openings. Now, they're a big company, 16, 17,000 employees, something like that. But even so, it's quite a lot, I think. And that's of course right across the world as well. But even so, I think that they are a company that struggle to find good people. Now, the kind of space they're in, and certainly the location they're in at head office, makes that particularly challenging for them. I mean, if you're trying to recruit, a software engineer in the Silicon Valley, good luck with that. Because you've got Google on your doorstep, you've got Microsoft down the road, you've got a whole load of startups offering, equity and all kinds of things. It's difficult. I do appreciate that, but this is a company who are stretched, and they've been stretched for as long as I can remember. And I think that's as someone from a staffing background, that's a difficult place to be, and it's a difficult place to get out of, and it's a constant challenge. So it is an interesting thing under those circumstances to then say, tell you what, everyone take a week off. And you wonder if it's a PR exercise. Again, I'm sounding very cynical here, but you wonder if it's a bit of a PR exercise because they know the kind of people that they tend to employ are actually going to carry on working for at least a percentage of that time. But what they're basically saying is, you don't have to work, but you probably will. Something like that. Unless that, they're actually being very disciplined about it and making sure that people don't work, and they get in trouble if they do, that type of thing. I don't know. Apparently when they come back to the office, they're going to have this new policy in place where they can work flexibly up to 50% of the time. It's something that other people, including Microsoft, have been doing for a while. So it's what they call a hybrid work schedule, where workers only come into the office a few days a week. Now, this is just, I think, going to be commonplace. I think it's not been that unusual anyway, but I think, coming out of lockdown, I think that is going to be commonplace amongst many companies. And, I think most of us accept that office space is going to reduce for many organisations. I think there's going to be, if you wanted to get office space for your company over the next few years, then it's a good time because it's going to be cheap, because there's going to be a lot of people trying to sublet if they from 10-year lease agreements that they're committed to before lockdown, and now they find that they need about 50% of the space that they thought they needed, and they'll sublet a little office to you for next to nothing. I think things like that are going to be quite interesting. But of course, that's if you want office space, because certainly most organisations are thinking, well, we're a small growing company, we can just do this from home and everybody can work from home. And people are more used to that now, aren't they? But anyway, that's something that they're going to be doing when they get back. So it's interesting when you see articles like that, I always kind of feel what's the real story behind the story, if you like. And I suspect that it's a little bit of a PR exercise, both internally and externally. So the message is, we need to recruit a lot of people. So I tell you what, let's put a message out that we're a great company to work for, and we just give people a week off just like that without any notice at all. Whereas, of course, the real story is they're probably going to continue working anyway. All right, so if you want to get your account suspended or banned for life on LinkedIn, then listen up, my tutorial is about to follow. So this is an increasingly important issue that I think we all need to be thinking about. I wouldn't be covering it in this episode if I didn't think it was really important. And we've touched on this many, many times before in the podcast and heard stories about people losing their accounts, etc., etc. Always remember the one that I use as a sort of example, as a warning to people, is Josh Fector. Now, Josh was a very successful content producer on LinkedIn. He was the guy that came up with the kind of broetry thing and text-only posts that did exceptionally well. And he claims that he was banned by LinkedIn because he nailed the algorithm and they didn't want him doing that, which is garbage, because, of course, anybody that's producing great content that people engage with is great for LinkedIn. That's what they want. No, he got banned because he decided to start using automation products, and as a result he just lost his account, and 80,000 followers gone, and a business that was largely, from what I can see, built on the back of LinkedIn, massively affected overnight. Now, you probably haven't got 80,000 followers, or maybe you have. Good for you if you have. But in a way it doesn't matter, because we're using this tool with an intention to grow our visibility and become somebody that people look up to and want to do business with. And we know the reason you're here, right, and the reason why I do this podcast is that we can't dispute it, really. It's a valuable platform. It's an extremely valuable platform to us. And we should cherish that, and we should look after it. But we should also look after ourselves and make sure that we don't put ourselves in a Josh Fector situation where all of a sudden we lose our account. Now, traditionally, this hasn't been a particularly difficult thing to do, because the reality of it is that so long as you act in a responsible way and don't try to be too clever and cheat or cut corners or do things that you know deep down are against the rules, then you should be fine. There shouldn't be an issue. And if that was the case, and I was confident that was the case, then I wouldn't be doing this episode. But as I said before, the reason I'm doing the episode is that it seems to me that the trust and safety team are getting a lot more sensitive to things and are banning people more rapidly or easily than they have done previously. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But obviously there are going to be some innocent victims of that, as they should go over the line. You know, if there's a line, then occasionally you would expect them to go over that line, and when they do, innocent people fall foul of it. But to me, that's not a bad thing, because it means they're right on the ball, and that protects all of us, because we want to protect LinkedIn. It's valuable to us. And without the trust and safety team, who aren't always the most popular people at LinkedIn, and they're certainly not popular with us if we fall foul of them and we suddenly get a message from them, which is not pleasant. But if that happens, then, you know, you hate them. But if we look at it in a holistic way, in the rounds, then actually these guys are doing a really important job, and we should applaud them for that, and we should appreciate the fact that they're doing it. I really genuinely believe that. I really do. But because they're getting much more twitchy than they used to, we need to be particularly vigilant to what we're doing on LinkedIn, so that we're not one of those innocent victims as Kelsey was. Now, before I go any further with this, let me now move over and let's hear what Kelsey's story is all about. So Kelsey's a recruiter, the person that I mentioned in last week's show. Let's let her explain what happened to her. So you're a recruiter, but you're running your own recruitment business, are you?
Yes, correct. So I own an executive recruiting firm. We do everything on a property manager to the C-suite, a direct hire basis here in the United States, so nationally. So we work with a lot of different companies inside the multifamily arena, commercial real estate, HOA sectors, and we partner with them to find great talent to join their teams.
Cool. Okay. So you've been a LinkedIn user for how long?
Man, I want to say 5 years, but truly actively, probably the last 3 years.
Okay, right, fine. And that's you've had your own business for what, 2 years? Is that right? Something like that?
In September, we'll be officially open for 3 years.
Oh, okay, right. So sort of 2.5-ish, right? Okay, very good.
Yes.
And obviously you've been using LinkedIn extensively during that time.
Yes.
And have you, just as background information before we talk about your story, during that time, that 2.5 years or so, have you had a recruiter account?
Yes. So essentially when I started Core Executive Recruiting, you know, utilizing the platform, realizing that this is an area I'm going to really try to market and be different compared to a lot of my competition, is leverage, making relationships. At one point I got where I was like, okay, well, I need LinkedIn recruiter seat readily available to be able to be more effective in our position. And then over time, as the company grew and I added multiple recruiters to our team, it only made sense for us to have those recruiter licensed seats. So it's been I've been with LinkedIn Recruiter for probably almost 2 years now. Yes, probably 2 years. And it's been very nimble. So now I no longer do as much recruiting as often. My recruiters do it. So I run all the operations and business development and kind of oversee the process and maybe recruit here and there. So there has been times where, okay, now I'm going to transition out of my seat and relinquish this over to, you know, my other executive recruiter as we continue to grow. So it's been an evolving relationship. It's grown over a period of time. And that was one of the best things about LinkedIn recruiters, finding different ways to work with your account manager to be creative and solution oriented.
Okay, cool. Excellent. So your personal account has been a recruiter account, but isn't now, in that it's your staff that run recruiter accounts. So as a business, you're paying for recruiter accounts, but your personal account is not a recruiter account.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
Cool.
So what happened, it was a very unique situation is, it's one of those things where you're paying all this money to LinkedIn so it's almost maybe naive to realize that you're actually not protected. And that was really what it came down to, is that my team and the company is protected. But because I essentially was no longer using a recruiter, because I no longer recruit on a regular basis, it actually compromised me, even though that I'm the sole owner of it. And so again, it was one of those things where you're investing thousands and thousands of dollars, and you just don't even realize that you're not necessarily underneath the same umbrella as the organization itself. Yep. And so that's something good for anybody to know now.
Absolutely, and it could happen very easy to a lot of people, I can imagine. So talk me through what happened then. So you kind of go to, you presumably you'd been doing a bit of recruiting. It's not something you normally do, but you'd needed to do a bit of recruiting. So you were viewing a lot more profiles than normal. Was that the case?
So the way that, again, like the clarity didn't come till end of last week. So really just to kind of take you back to the beginning, where I started to see some things that were concerning and I wasn't understanding what was happening, is it all started around March 5th. So up in that time frame, every Friday, so the last 4 weeks, I would have the app on my phone. And so I'm usually logged in on my phone anyhow. But Friday late evening, I would get like logged out of LinkedIn, and it would just send me this little notification on the app. So I would screenshot it just saying, hey, we've temporarily suspended your account for suspicious activity. Something in regards, very vague, very ambiguous. And then you're locked out until Sunday at 7:04 p.m. And so I would send it to my account manager. Hey, I got this weird message. Can you please help me understand what's going on? To my knowledge, I'm not using this platform maliciously. Please advise. And so that happened for the past every other week in March and the weekend, where I'd be kicked out. And all I knew was to go to my account manager and help remedy this situation. And the first time I had sent it over, she just said, well, is it back up on Monday? And it was. And so she was like, all right, well, essentially, it must have been a technical error. That doesn't make sense.
Just to be clear, when you're talking about your account manager, you're talking about a LinkedIn employee that is responsible for your recruiter account as a company. Yeah.
Yes, okay, absolutely. Cool. You're correct.
Yep.
Yes. So my LinkedIn account manager.
Yep.
And so then the next weekend went by. There was no issues, nothing that I should be concerned about. The following weekend, something very similar happened. Late Friday, I got another thing on my phone saying I was kicked out until that Sunday. So I sent it again to my LinkedIn account manager. Hey, I've got this message again. Something must be wrong. Can we please help figure this out? Like, I don't, the way that they write it is so vague and so ambiguous. Yeah. You can't really decipher what it is. And so, we filed a ticket. We went through the process. No issues. Nothing came back. Hey, Kelsey, you're doing XYZ. This is what we need to do to solve the problem. So I was like, okay, well, I've done everything that I know that I need to do. And again, I don't really necessarily agree that that's proper warning. If it's just literally on my phone and I'm taking screenshots of notifications. So the following weekend happened.
You got nothing on desktop?
No, I never received a phone call. I never received an email. I never received any proper notification. And I feel like in order to solve what may be happening, it's very challenging to understand if there's nothing coming, no alerts are coming to me other than just kicking me out and some ambiguous message. And I did everything I thought I needed to do. And my account manager wasn't very worried either. So I guess, how do you know something would escalate to the level that it did?
Yeah.
Nobody could have planned for that.
This is a really important point, and I'm so glad you brought that up. One of the things that people need to understand about LinkedIn as a company, they're a very big company these days, and a LinkedIn employee is not the font of all knowledge about LinkedIn. Far from it, in my experience. And so this person, your account manager, should have escalated this, should have gone, well, this doesn't look right, and internally dealt with that, asked the right questions, but instead went back to you in ignorance, to be fair, and said, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. Obviously, this is a warning system that she should have known about, and you should have been alerted. Look, you're viewing too many profiles or whatever it was. And so I guess the point I want to make to people listening to this is don't believe everything your contact at LinkedIn tells you, push back, because this could happen to anybody. So, yeah, brilliant. Okay. So what happened next?
So then the final weekend, which was the last weekend in March, I believe, is where the same thing happened. Friday, late evening, happened again. I got kicked out. The only difference with this time is I went on Monday to try to log in. And then instead of normally being able to still have access to it, it just said you've been permanently restricted. And to me, it was like, how did this happen? Like, I know that there's a much bigger problem going on. And so that's where I got on the phone with my LinkedIn account manager and said, hey, there's something bigger going on here. I need clarification. I don't understand. And at that time, I wasn't too worried. I was just frustrated. Yeah. And so then that's whenever it got escalated, the case. But what was very bizarre was later that afternoon, I had received an email from an individual named Leslie, no last name, no contact information, nothing personable, that literally emailed me and just said, after reviewing your account, we've received from a colleague to review your case, and to our knowledge that you've been viewing too many profiles, therefore we've been permanently restricting your account moving forward. And that was like the worst news possible. It was just very abrupt, very indirect. I mean, there wasn't any call line. I didn't even know who Leslie's last name was. I didn't understand where she was part of the organization. All I knew was some lady named Leslie wrote me this email saying it's been shut down. And then I asked my team, can you please look me up on LinkedIn? And I was just gone. I mean, everything I've ever created, all the reviews and recommendations, all of the connections, I wasn't even able to pull up and Google at all. No. It just was wiped out. And I'm not going to lie, that freaked me out quite a bit because, it's like, okay, well, what do I do from here? Because if my account manager doesn't necessarily know what the next correct actions are, in my head, I'm kind of looking at the reality of LinkedIn is so big and there's so many hierarchies and so many processes and stuff. And, I found out you only have, I think it's 14 or either 30 days before the cloud completely wipes out everything. Right. And again, if your case is not getting all the way up to the very top, every single day matters. Yeah. And if I didn't have everybody supporting me, I definitely would have been that percentage who would just fall through the cracks and there was no explanation.
That is so scary. I can't imagine what it must have felt like for you, Kelsey. That's a horrible thing to have to happen to you. So how did you manage to get past this then? How did you, because you're back on LinkedIn now, so obviously it has a happy ending, but how did you get there?
It literally took a village. It took an entire team. I think this goes to show you and everybody else that when I'm on LinkedIn, I'm here to build meaningful relationships and actually build rapport with people that I wouldn't normally have in my own backyard. And this is kind of a testament to that right now, that what had happened is I've built all these great relationships who actually stood up for me without even asking them. I just told them, hey guys, I'm kind of freaking out. My LinkedIn's gone. I'm afraid the company page will be next because I was affiliated under the company page. Mm-hmm. And, I went into, okay, what do I need to do? And how do I need to get my voice heard? And so there was several of my closest relationships, friends that I've met on this platform, clients and candidates who went to bat for me. And I mean, I had no access to LinkedIn at all. Like I couldn't even look at anything that was happening. And Joe Lagley, I'm a client of his and we've partnered together since last fall. he really went out of his way to support and to advocate on my behalf. And
Yep.
truly, without everybody liking and commenting and resharing, I believe that that's truly why the case was escalated to the level of magnitude it was. I that's what I genuinely believe.
Yeah.
Because LinkedIn, there's so many steps and processes in place.
Yep.
There's hundreds of cases going on that are needing to be, evaluated. And so to think that my account manager could have got me from here all the way to the top in such a short turnaround time, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I definitely do not think that that was the only contributor to that. I really think the 5,000 people and the 500,000 views is what helped me.
It's not great PR for them, is it? A paying customer, although, all right, not your account. You can understand how it's happened, right? They, just to put a bit of defense to LinkedIn on this one. One of the worst things that can happen to LinkedIn is automation. And, I'm dead against any kind of bot and automation. And so I applaud them for having systems in place to stop high levels of activity that, are potentially done by machines and bots, because that ruins the experience for us all. So they have to have these things in place. And I can see what's happened, i.e., you're not a recruiter. At first, the way that Joel's post read, it looked like you had a recruiter account and you'd got kicked off with a recruiter account, which would be absolutely unbelievably appalling. But that obviously wasn't the case. So I can see how it's happened. But as we've already said, your account manager should have been able to escalate that for you, because, at the end of the day, yes, there are lots of people that this happens to, but the vast majority, my guess would be 90% or so, are not people who work for companies that have accounts with LinkedIn and pay LinkedIn a lot of money a year. I mean, all right, don't get me wrong. If you were an employee for, I don't know, a company that's paying, hundreds of thousands of dollars to LinkedIn a year, I'm sure that would have been escalated more quickly for sure. But even so, you would think that they should be able to escalate it. But it's that I always say there are three LinkedIns. There's LinkedIn, the website, there's LinkedIn, the company, and then there's us, which is LinkedIn, the community. And your story is a great case of LinkedIn, the company, were not helping you. In fact, actually made it worse in many respects, because they just told you it wasn't a problem, and prevented you from using LinkedIn, the website. But then the third player in that, LinkedIn, the community, came to your rescue, gathered around, pulled together, and as a result, here you are, back on LinkedIn, the website, which I think is a great story. I'm so glad it ended up nicely for you. But to be fair to you, that doesn't happen to anyone. There's lots of people out there on LinkedIn that would ask for support and wouldn't get it. And it's because, and I don't know you, but I'm just really going from what I've read from Joel, but it's because you've spent that time building relationships, and people want to help you out, and that's networking for you. That's what it's all about. If you want to be part of this community, then you got to give to it, and when you do give to it, when in need, it'll give back to you. So all credit to you, really, for spending that 3 years or so on LinkedIn, building those kind of relationships that have really paid off for you in this situation.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, truly, if the community didn't come together, and, I was thinking about making a short little video just to shout out to every single person. I'm like, it brings me to tears. I keep saying that, but it's truly like, everybody's got their own life. Everybody's got their own things that they're all dealing with. But the fact that so many people in this really crucial time frame were able to support and come together and advocate and be the voice when I couldn't stand up for myself. Like, I realized I'm like the 1%er who was very fortunate to have anybody even care about the situation, let alone comment, like, and reshare. And it just goes to show you that this platform is effective. This platform on LinkedIn can be great. If used correctly, and if you really are building relationships, like this right there just made me fall in love more with the community that wow, you don't have to fight all these big battles by yourself, like you do have all these people all around the world who are actually there, who will take the 15 seconds of their day to actually care. And so thank you guys from the bottom of my heart, including you, for actually supporting me and not knowing who I am, and kind of going on a limb. I realize that that's not always the easiest thing to do, but truly I would not be here right now without everybody. Like I can tell you right now, my LinkedIn would not be back today. There's just no way that it would have surpassed all of the other cases that have been waiting.
But there you go. That's what happened to Kelsey. Doesn't she tell that story really well? And one thing I thought about when I was listening to her talking, and I've listened back to it now, but even at the time when I was chatting to her, is the thing about Joel in his original post that we referred to. He was saying, look, Kelsey's one of the good guys, she shouldn't be banned and da-da-da-da. And you think, well, okay, I wouldn't say that about someone that's a friend or whatever. But actually, I totally get where he's coming from. She just comes across so genuine and lovely. And, she took her time and, I'm sure she's had a lot of messages, obviously. And but she responded to me really quickly and said, yeah, I'll come on the show, no problem at all. Happy to explain it. And I just think she's a really generous, giving person. You can just tell that, can't you, the way she comes across. But it's a warning to us, isn't it? It could happen to us. If it can happen to Kelsey, it can happen to you. And you might be thinking this, well, okay, great, Mark, but she's a recruiter. She's going to view lots of profiles. I wouldn't be doing that kind of activity. No, you might not. But you might be doing something else. And there are lots of other ways that you can get into trouble with LinkedIn. And I just want to quickly go through some of those just so that we have a reality check. Because as I say, the trust and safety team are clamping down more and more on people, and we can't all guarantee that we're going to be able to muster the support that Kelsey did, and we could end up in jail for quite a long time. So let me tell you my story. What happened to me was, this is a long time ago now, but I literally just went onto LinkedIn in the morning. I was still logged in, so I started doing something, and then as I refreshed the page, it just chucked me out, and then there was a message saying, get in contact with customer service, your account's been suspended. Which was a bit of a shock. Now, I found out, and I won't bore you with the whole story, but basically it took me about 4 days to get back up, and that was the longest 4 days of my life, you can imagine. And it was horrible, and the problem occurred, I didn't know at the time initially, but they eventually explained to me that my job title was LinkedIn trainer, which is kind of what I do, but that breaks the user agreement because it suggests I work for LinkedIn. And I kind of did know that because people were contacting me and saying, oh, you work for LinkedIn, I don't like this, or, and I'd be like, no, I don't work for LinkedIn. Why do you think that? It's very clear who my employer is, but people don't read that. So LinkedIn have a rule that you're not supposed to do that, or they did at that time anyway, and that's why I got in trouble. I didn't realise I was doing anything wrong, but that's basically what happened, and 4 or 5 days later I got my account back. And it's a really, if anybody listening to this has experienced this, you'll probably know what I mean. It's a really horrible feeling because you just naturally feel like you've done something wrong. You feel kind of guilty, although you don't know what you've done wrong. But wow, that was an exhausting, stressful, horrible experience. So I really feel for anybody that it happens to. And people often contact me when it happens. And so over the years, I've had a number of people contact me and say, this has happened, da, da, da. And sometimes it's because they've been hacked. So the first point I want to make on this is that if you want to get banned, right, then one way to achieve that is to let your profile, your account, be hacked. And one way to make that easier is to not set up two-step verification on your profile. If it does happen to you, either being hacked or banned for whatever reason, you tend to get a temporary ban these days. And they say that, well, actually, let me read you this message that someone once sent me when they were banned. I've actually got a screenshot that someone once sent me here, and it says, we've restricted your account temporarily. It appears that you're visiting a very high number of pages on LinkedIn with supernatural frequency. That's the terminology they use, supernatural. I love that. We think you may be using an automation tool. To help guard against abuse, we don't permit the use of software tools that automate activity on LinkedIn. We showed you a warning about this previously, so for now we have restricted your account until, and then they give you a date, which is usually a couple of days in the future, and a time. Please try signing in again after this time. Please note that engaging further in such activity may result in permanent restriction of your account. So there are a number of things that can go wrong, if you like, or that you can do wrong. Now, one of them is the one that happened to me, which is profile, right? So creating a profile that breaks the user agreement. Now, there are things that you can do in your profile in terms of pictures that you use and things like that might be obscene, or words that you use in your profile that offend people and things of that nature. That's possible, but I very much doubt you'd do that. But you might make the mistake that I made, right? And things of that nature, just be careful. I will put a copy of the user agreement, or the do's and don'ts section of the user agreement, for you in the show notes. It's actually not that long. It'll take you just a couple of minutes to read it. And I'd really strongly encourage you do so, just to make sure that your profile is right. You may think, well, it must be right because I've not been banned. Don't think that, right? They don't go searching for this stuff. They work on it being reported. So if 5 people report something to LinkedIn, then that triggers them to look into it. And you don't know when that could happen. So you might have got away with something for 5 years and then all of a sudden you don't, right? So be careful. Okay, that's probably the first one. Now, the second one that you could get, which is a sort of ban but not completely, or it's a restriction really, is when you're inviting people to connect, there are one or two things that can happen. If you get a lot of people that say no to your invitation and report as a result that they don't know you. So you know how when you say no to an invitation to connect, it then says, is it because you don't know this person? If they click on that, then, and that number of people that do that is a high percentage of the number of invitations that are rejected, okay, then you go into what's called a restricted account, and that means that you always need an email address every time you invite someone to connect. Now, years ago, this used to be a big issue, and what happened was, at 5 I don't knows, or IDKs as we used to call them when it was a bigger issue, because everyone used to talk about this. At 5 IDKs, that's when it triggered the suspension or the restriction. It's not now, it's a percentage, so you don't know exactly what that number is. So that doesn't mean that you should never invite someone that you don't know, but it does mean that it makes a lot of sense to personalize your invites, right, in a nice, polite way. And but don't say to people, please don't click I don't know, because you're just asking them to do it if you do that, in effect. But if you write them a nice short note, then the chances are that they're probably not going to click on the I don't know thing. Now, most people don't anyway. That's why it's not so much an issue these days, because it's not that obvious. And I just think people are used to seeing it, and it just kind of appears, certainly on mobile, it appears there briefly and then it goes. So it doesn't happen that much, not such a problem. Actually, more of a problem these days with invites is a low invitation acceptance rate. And what that means is that even if they don't say that they don't know you, if a very high percentage of your invites, and you're sending a lot, are rejected, then you can get your account suspended. That can be a reason why it can happen. Okay, so that normally it crosses into the automation side, because normally people don't send that many invitations. That might be what they call supernatural frequency. That might be what's triggered that. It might be that there's too much activity, or it might be that the activity itself was high but not supernatural, but the amount of rejections was very high. Like, I don't know what the number would be, but let's say it's 80% as a guess, right? If 80% reject your invitation to connect, then LinkedIn are going, this is a problem. We don't want this person inviting more people. And they may ban you temporarily and warn you, or they may just make it that you need an email address to invite people to connect. Okay, so either of those two scenarios could happen. Okay, and then we get into the realms of spam. So if you send someone a direct message on LinkedIn or an in-mail on LinkedIn, then in fact, in-mails are less of an issue, and I'll come to that in a second. But if you send someone a direct message who you're connected to, and they report it as spam, by doing so, they'll probably disconnect with you as well, because they're given that option. But if a lot of people report it as spam, then you will get your account suspended. And again, it will be a temporary thing, and you'll be told why in that initial message, okay? So be careful. If you're sending out lots of messages and they're getting rejected by people because they're considered to be spam, then that's going to cause you a problem. And, most people know what spam looks like. And so if you're doing it as a kind of standard and you're copy and pasting it and doing lots of messages and it's not personalized and you're just pitching them, then there's a chance that's going to happen. You'd have to send it to quite a lot of people. This is not using automation, though. This is just doing it manually yourself. Now, another reason, and this is a controversial one, is that you are using some form of browser extension. So browsers like Google Chrome have in the Chrome store lots of extensions, and some of those extensions are things that work with LinkedIn. We talked about this when I had a chat with Andreas from Shield, because Shield use an extension as a way of accessing data. And so my question was, well, that is an extension, and officially extensions are banned by LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn, just to make life easy for themselves, well, to be honest, it's probably the only way they could do it, is they can't say, here's a list of trusted, safe extensions. They just say, extensions, you can't use them, end of, right? That doesn't mean that there isn't internally a list of extensions that they know are okay and that the trust and safety team will turn a blind eye to, right? But they'll never tell us that, but I'm sure there is. And personally, just a belief, personally, I believe Shield is one of those, right? Although there have been reports recently that people had problems with Shield, but I think that might have been something else. But hey, you can't be absolutely 100% sure of anything you use that is a browser extension. So you may recall in a previous episode I talked about PWAR, which was this way of managing messages, and it's a harmless product. You're not doing anything with that product that is damaging